You lie still, and your mind, like a deep lake, holds ripples of every memory. Some are soft and silvery. Others are jagged, lingering like echoes that won't fade. Tonight, we step gently into the folds of the brain, where memory is both shield and shadow. You begin to wonder, what if we could find the place where fear lives, ... and ask it to sleep? In this chapter, we explore how the brain stores trauma, and how it might one day let it go. Asterisk, your breath softens. You're lying beneath the ceiling of your own mind, a sky not of stars, but of thoughts. Some flicker like gentle memories, the scent of a summer morning, the shape of a loved one's smile. Others press heavier, the things you didn't want to remember, but do. Not by choice, but by the way your body remembers what it fears. Inside your head, a tiny almond-shaped structure hums quietly, the amygdala. This is where your brain learns fear, where it stores the warnings etched by experience. It doesn't use language or logic, it uses feeling. If you touched a hot stove once, your hand jerks back before your brain even reasons why. And next to it, curled like a question mark, is the hippocampus, your brain's librarian of time and place. It stores stories, events, the scent of smoke, the chill of a hallway, the sound that came just before something bad. When trauma enters, it doesn't knock. It carves paths deep and fast. Your brain, in trying to protect you, burns that fear into your circuits. It's a survival trick, an evolutionary gift. But sometimes, the system doesn't know when the danger has passed, and so the memories remain, not just in your thoughts, but in your skin, your breath, your sleep. That's post-traumatic stress disorder, when your inner world forgets how to feel safe, even in safety. Imagine walking down a quiet street, but your heart races, because a car engine reminds you of something loud, something long ago. Or falling asleep only to be yanked awake by dreams that carry old pain like freight. Your body is not broken. It's simply remembering too well. Now, science begins to whisper a new question, but of editing. Could we soften the sharp edges of a memory, leaving the lesson, but removing the suffering? This is where CRISPR enters the story. CRISPR is not a pill or a therapy session. It is a tool, tiny molecular scissors, not for cutting paper, but for rewriting the code of life itself. In bacteria, CRISPR is a defense system, a way to recognize and destroy invaders. But scientists have learned to guide it, to cut specific pieces of DNA, to change a single letter. in the alphabet of your body's instructions. What if we could guide it to a neuron, to a gene involved in storing fear, to the trace of trauma that lives in your hippocampus like a ghost refusing to leave? It's not science fiction. In mice, researchers have already used CRISPR to edit genes related to memory. Some mice who once froze in fear at a sound now walk calmly, not because they forgot, but because the memory no longer hurts. But before we walk too far, we pause, because memories are not just stored in cells. They live in your identity, in the shape of who you've become. If you removed a painful memory, would something essential vanish too? Would the scar you bore proudly now fade, and with it, the strength you found? Science, as gentle as it can be, is also powerful. It must tread carefully, especially where the soul and mind touch. So tonight, we simply explore. You close your eyes and feel your mind as a library, not of books, but of electrical storms, of whispering synapses, of molecules telling time. Trauma may be loud, but science and your own healing may be louder still, and just beyond the threshold of thought, a new chapter waits, one that asks how memory is made in the first place, and whether we are more than what we remember. Asterisk, before we can talk about erasing trauma, we must first understand how memory is made. This chapter is a gentle walk through the architecture of memory itself, from fleeting impressions to lasting impressions, etched into the self. You'll drift through the brain's quiet corridors, watching as it chooses what to keep and what to let go. Asterisk, your breathing slows outside. The world hushes down, a lullaby in the hum of distant traffic, in the soft press of the pillow beneath your head. Inside, your mind stirs, but not with worry, with wonder. Let's return, gently, to your brain. It isn't a hard drive. It doesn't save memories the way a computer does, grows them. Like a gardener, it chooses which moments to root and which to let blow away with the breeze. The process begins with something simple: attention. You notice a smell, maybe jasmine, maybe smoke. You hear a voice, maybe sharp, maybe warm, and your brain lights up. Tiny sparks jumping across neurons. That flicker is a sensory trace, not yet a memory, but the beginning of one. Then comes encoding, the first stage of memory formation. Your brain takes the raw input and translates it into something meaningful. Visual information routes through the occipital lobe, sounds through the temporal lobe, touch through the parietal cortex. Your brain is organizing a chorus of impressions, turning the world into patterns. But not everything is stored. Right now, thousands of sensations touch you. The rustle of fabric, the shift in room temperature. Most of it fades instantly, Your brain is efficient, and only the things that matter are chosen for short-term memory. And what determines what matters? Emotion. This is where the amygdala and hippocampus come back into play. If an experience carries emotional weight, like fear, love, surprise, your amygdala flags it. Pay attention, it signals. This could be important. Then your hippocampus steps forward. It places the memory into a timeline. Records where you were, what you saw, what you felt. It gives your story a spine. But memory is still fragile here. Like wet cement, only with consolidation does it harden into something long-lasting. This can take hours, sometimes days. That's why sleep is sacred. Your brain rehearses memories as you rest, reliving them, strengthening the neural connections, deciding what to keep and what to gently dissolve. This is why you may forget what you had for lunch, but remember the day your life changed. Some memories become episodic, rich, vivid stories. You know where you were, what the sky looked like, what someone said that pierced your heart. Others become semantic, stripped of place and time. Just facts floating in your mental vault. Still others become procedural, muscle memory. How to ride a bike, how to tie a knot. Things you don't remember learning, you just do them. And here's the quiet truth. Even the most intense memories aren't fixed. They're reconstructions, not recordings. Every time you recall one, your brain rewrites it, subtly, adds emotion, distorts timing, fills in blanks with your current beliefs. So memory is alive, shaped by the past, but also by the now. And trauma. Trauma is when a memory refuses to soften with time. When each recall strengthens the fear rather than dissolving it. When the hippocampus stumbles and the amygdala screams louder than logic. It isn't your fault. Your brain is trying to protect you, but it's stuck in a loop. And that's what makes the idea of CRISPR so interesting. Because what if you could return to the moment the memory was formed? Not to delete the event, but to turn down its volume. To let the memory live, but not in a way that hurts you. Science is learning where in this process trauma embeds itself, which genes turn on during fear consolidation, which neural pathways fire too often, and most importantly, where the system could be gently edited. In some studies, scientists have identified proteins like BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, that affect how memories form. By regulating its expression, they've been able to reduce fear responses in animals. Other genes, like CREB or FOSB, are involved in laying down long-term memories. Imagine if you could target just those moments, not with a hammer, but with a feather, precision, compassion. Of course, we are still far from editing human memory safely. But the first blueprints exist, and just understanding how memory works, how fragile and flowing it truly is, can be empowering, because healing may not always come from deletion. It might come from reinterpretation. Your memory is not a prison. It is a script you are allowed to revise. Tonight, as you drift off, imagine your mind as a vast editing room. You sit at the console, not to erase, but to highlight, to soften, to reframe. The pain you remember is real, but it is not permanent, and somewhere deep within your brain, new memories are being formed of calm, of curiosity, of nights like this one. Asterisk, you drift deeper now into the space between memory and mind. Here, in the quiet corridors of your brain, tiny messengers spark and flicker. These are synapses, the delicate bridges where memory is born and fear is replayed. Tonight, you'll walk softly among them and listen to what they whisper. A chapter of stillness, connection, and the unseen electric ballet within. Your mind is not one thing. It's a symphony of signals, a whispering forest of pulses and pauses. Beneath the silence of your resting body, a world is alive, glowing, humming, endlessly, talking, and at the center of that quiet noise are your synapses. Imagine for a moment that your brain is a vast city at night, not bustling, but softly lit, each light a memory, each flicker a thought. Now zoom in. Between every two neurons, the long branching cells of your mind is a tiny space, so small it's invisible, even to most microscopes. This space is the synapse. And here, across that infinitesimal gap, the story of your life is passed on. One chemical spark at a time, when you remember the sound of someone's voice. The fear that once gripped your chest, the warmth of a hand you once held, those feelings are not stored in little boxes. They're reassembled each time you remember them, rebuilt like a melody echoing in the space between neurons. Each time you recall, you re-experience, and each time, the memory changes ever so slightly. This important, because fear, the kind of fear you wish you could forget, is not a fixed scar. It is a rehearsal, one that gets repeated until it becomes a reflex. And every repetition carves the grooves a little deeper. In post-traumatic stress, or PTSD, the brain's natural safety alarm becomes oversensitive. A harmless sound, a smell, even a color can ignite the full orchestra of terror. It's not because your brain is broken. It's because it learned too deeply, too thoroughly, how to keep you safe. even if the danger has long passed. What CRISPR may offer one day is not just the deletion of fear, but the gentle rebalancing of these synaptic songs to quiet the overplayed ones, to soothe the hyperactive alarms. But before that can happen, we need to understand the instruments. Your synapses don't just carry information. They grow stronger with use. This is known as long-term potentiation. It's the brain's way of saying, "This mattered. Keep it." And trauma, intense, emotional, terrifying trauma, tends to be remembered very well, too well. But even this can be a kind of poetry, because it means the brain listens to experience. It learns, and if it can learn fear, it might learn peace again. Neurotransmitters, the chemical messengers of the brain, are released at these synapses like rain across leaves. Glutamate for excitation, GABA for calm, dopamine for reward, serotonin for mood. They mingle, float, and bind like dancers exchanging hands. And these pairings shape not just what you remember, but how you feel it. A trauma may cause the amygdala, the almond-shaped center of fear, to roar louder. Sharpens synaptic strength in fear circuits, while the hippocampus, which gives memory its context and timeline, may falter under stress. That's why PTSD doesn't just replay fear. It blurs time, making the past feel like the present. But again, the brain is not a prison. It is plastic, not plastic like a bottle, but neuroplastic, ever-changing, moldable. Even years after a trauma, synaptic pathways can be softened, rerouted, or gently dimmed. Now imagine if, with precision, you could turn down only the overactive ones. Leave the rest of your memories untouched. The joy, the laughter, the love, and touch only the shadowed paths where fear walks too loudly. This is the dream of targeted memory editing. But what if that's not just a dream? What if science is already mapping the very genes and proteins that control how these synapses strengthen or weaken in response to experience? In recent studies, researchers have found that certain molecules, like CREB, are deeply involved in the consolidation of emotional memories. Too much of it in fear circuits, and the memory etches itself into the mind, like a scar into glass. But reduce it gently, and maybe, just maybe, the scar becomes soft enough to fade. CRISPR, as a tool, allows scientists to move with an elegance that biology never allowed before. To step into a single neuron and say, not this protein, not here, not now. It's not about erasing memories like files on a computer. It's about modulation. It's about healing the instrument, not silencing the music, as you lie here tonight. Maybe your mind turns to something that once frightened you. A sound, a place, a moment, and maybe your synapses begin to whisper their song again. But this time, as you listen, you imagine a hand gently lowering the volume, not ignoring, not forgetting, just softening the idea that we could do this scientifically once lived only in science fiction. Now it flickers in labs across the world. Tiny electric fields in mouse brains, light-sensitive neurons, gene silencing switches. And though we are still at the edge, the frontier, the trail is marked. In the next chapter, you'll drift even deeper to the molecular level, where the architecture of memory itself is drawn in loops and coils of DNA, where CRISPR does not just edit, but listens and whispers back. So rest now as the synapses dim, and let the space between thoughts begin to glow. Asterisk, you arrive at the molecular gates of memory, where proteins and patterns whisper quietly. CRISPR waits like a locksmith at the edge of thought, offering its tool to rewrite the codes of pain. But the question remains, what happens when we turn the key? Asterisk, you are no longer in the shadows of the past, but standing at the very gate of memory itself, place where biology whispers, not shouts. Every memory you hold, every moment that shaped you, is stored not in boxes or cabinets, but in delicate webs of neurons and shifting chemicals. These memories live within the cells of your brain, encoded in patterns, strengthened by repetition, and tethered by emotion. Among these memories, some are soft and warm. The scent of rain on your childhood street, the hush of your mother's voice before sleep. But others, those formed in the cold, sharp places of trauma, cling with a different kind of energy. They are seared into you, not just mentally, but molecularly, etched into your neural wiring through fear's raw intensity. And now, at this quiet intersection of curiosity and care, we meet CRISPR again, not as a blunt tool, but as a surgeon of code. It has moved beyond laboratories and mice, now whispering to the very molecules that cradle your memories. Can it edit trauma away? Can it find the single neuron trembling in pain and gently rewrite its message? To understand this, imagine your memory like a library. In this library, fear memories are alarmed, section shelves that light up when you pass by, even if you don't open a book. Inside these shelves are proteins that are shaped by experience, one of which is called FKBP5. This protein behaves differently in those who've endured trauma. It keeps the body's stress response on high alert, like a fire alarm that never stops ringing. CRISPR, like a microscopic locksmith, might one day adjust these faulty alarm systems instead of erasing memories entirely. Scientists imagine calming the biochemical echo of fear, changing how the memory feels, not that it exists. Like repainting a haunted room, not demolishing it. There are experiments already blooming in quiet corners of research labs. In mice, scientists have used CRISPR to modify genes linked to fear, extinctions, such as the BDNF gene, which helps regulate how neurons adapt. When edited, these mice forgot conditioned fears faster. They still remembered the event, but the terror didn't return. In your mind, this would feel like walking past a place that once held a scream and hearing only silence. The memory remains, but the sting is gone. You still know what happened, but your body no longer reacts as if it's happening again. But every lock turned comes with a choice. What do we lose when we cannot feel fear as we did before? Fear, after all, is not only harm, it's also a guide, a signal of danger, a lesson etched in pain. CRISPR might help us unlearn the terror, but what if we also unlearn something vital? So, here, in this chapter, you rest your hand on the door. You feel the weight of possibility. A key has been forged, not of iron or brass, but of enzymes and intent. Whether to turn it remains an open question, and just before the thought fades, you begin to wonder, if we can soften the echo of fear, what else might we learn to remember differently? Asterisk, what if you had never flinched when the door slammed? What if your body didn't brace every time a stranger raised their voice? What if the roots of pain could be loosened from the soil of memory? What if we went into the garden and chose what grew? Asterisk, in the core of your brain lies the amygdala, curled almond-shaped structure, always watching. It's where your mind blooms with the sharpest reactions. Fight, flight, freeze. It doesn't think in words. It reacts in pulses. It remembers not the full story, but how something felt. Scientists have long known the amygdala as the epicenter of fear. But it's also something stranger, biological gardener, the seeds of memory planted during moments of intense emotion often take root here. But unlike a traditional garden, this one doesn't always nurture beauty. Sometimes it grows thorns. Trauma is a gardener with a heavy hand. It over-fertilizes fear, reinforcing certain memories again and again. A slammed door becomes a gunshot in the mind. A hallway becomes a tunnel of teeth. And once planted, those memories are hard to dig out. They're entangled with hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, and with deeply encoded genetic switches passed from generations before you. Now, with CRISPR, we are walking into that overgrown place with shears. not to destroy, but to tend. To carefully snip away the overgrowth of fear. To unbraid what trauma tangled. Imagine a future therapy. You sit in a room not cold and metallic, but soft-lit, with your breath monitored, your memories gently stirred. A technician uses CRISPR-based delivery tools, perhaps via a modified virus or a nanoparticle that carries a payload designed for one purpose: to locate a gene in your neurons that was flipped on by trauma, and turn it down like dimming a light dot. No erasure, just modulation. Researchers have begun mapping this garden. In the hippocampus, where long-term memories are stored, they've found gene expressions that differ in those with PTSD. Genes like NR3C1, CREB, ARC, and EGR1 molecular bookmarks that determine how strongly a memory is burned into the brain. With CRISPR, scientists are learning to adjust these tags. Lessening their influence means the emotional weight of certain memories can be softened in mice. One stunning study altered a single transcription factor NPAS 4 in the amygdala. These mice forgot to fear a previously terrifying tone. Memory remained, but the emotional fire had been doused. Their garden still held the thorn bush, but it no longer drew blood. And this is where the what-ifs begin to bloom. What if someone could choose which memories sting and which stay soft? What if a soldier returned from war no longer woke from dreams of gunfire? What if a woman, years from an abusive relationship, no longer startled at footsteps behind her? What if a child, once locked in a room alone, could remember the wallpaper and not the screams? But there are darker questions. What if we start pruning too much? What if grief, pain, fear, those sharp emotional thorns, serve not just to hurt us, but to warn us, to make us grow in ways safety never could? Would a world without trauma also be a world without depth? Person without scars might also be a person without stories. So, in this garden of what-ifs, we must tread carefully. CRISPR offers shears, but not judgment. It doesn't know which fear is worth forgetting. It doesn't feel the cost of erasing what once taught you how to survive. That choice, if it ever becomes real, won't be biological. It will be moral, personal, human. And so, you linger in this imagined garden. You see the memories you wish you could trim. You see the ones that shaped you. They shimmer side by side like dew on leaves. Some are ready to be let go. Others, you hold tighter than you thought. Tomorrow, we will walk deeper into this territory, into the future where CRISPR meets not only healing, but enhancement. But tonight, here in the garden of what-ifs, we pause to ask if we could edit. What made us hurt? ... Could we also edit what made us, us? Asterisk. Once upon a time, medicine was about curing illness. A broken bone was set, a fever was treated, a wound was stitched. But with the arrival of gene editing, especially the precision promise of CRISPR, crossed a boundary. We are no longer merely fixing what's broken. We're beginning to redesign what it means to feel. Imagine a future not where trauma is merely softened, but where emotion itself becomes programmable, logistable, like a thermostat. Where sadness can be shortened, joy prolonged, and fear fine-tuned to specific circumstances. The same tools developed to help those suffering from PTSD may soon be used by people who simply want to feel better than well. Welcome to the age of emotional enhancement. To understand how this becomes possible, we must return to the genome not as a static blueprint, but as a dynamic orchestra of influence. Emotions like happiness, fear, anger, and love aren't abstract. They are chemical symphonies shaped by genes, neurotransmitters, and brain structures, and they can be modulated. Take serotonin, for example, the so-called feel-good neurotransmitter. Genetic variations in the SLC6A4 gene affect how it's transported in the brain. People with certain versions of this gene are more vulnerable to anxiety and depression. With CRISPR, those variants could theoretically be edited, giving someone the more resilient version, but it doesn't stop there. BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, affects how we learn from experiences, especially emotionally charged ones. In clinical trials, boosting BDNF expression has led to faster recovery from depression and anxiety. CRISPR could offer permanent, heritable changes to BDNF pathways, unlocking faster cognitive resilience, even in emotionally turbulent lives. Now, imagine using these edits not to heal but to upgrade. A CEO schedules a gene therapy session before a high-stakes negotiation. The edit targets amygdala reactivity, lowering the physiological response to stress. He doesn't just stay calm under pressure, he becomes immune to anxiety. A teenager, terrified of public speaking, requests a confidence boost, a suite of edits that increase dopamine sensitivity, reduce cortisol spikes, and enhance memory retention under stress. A grieving widow, consumed by prolonged sorrow, asks for the volume to be turned down, not to erase her husband's memory, but to remove its weight. This is where healing blurs into enhancement, and enhancement into engineering. But if we can design our emotions, what happens to their meaning? Will courage still count if we can delete fear before it ever arrives? Will happiness feel hollow if it's simply hard-coded into our genome? Will sadness still teach us if we never truly experience it. Emotions have always been signals, not just internal, but social. Our faces express grief, love, anger, and fear because those states serve evolutionary functions. A child cries to summon a parent. A scowl warns a rival. Even laughter, scientists believe, evolved to strengthen group bonds. By editing our emotional systems, we may inadvertently alter how we relate to one another. If one person's sadness has been silenced by genetic intervention, while another's sorrow remains raw, what bridge exists between them? Could emotional enhancement lead to a new kind of inequality, not of wealth or intelligence, but of feeling? There's also the question of consent. Children born with edited emotional profiles may never know what it means to cry uncontrollably, to panic before a big event, to spiral into melancholic longing. They may thank us or they may resent us for robbing them of the very struggles that give life shape. Would Romeo and Juliet have fallen so hard if they'd had their serotonin genes optimized? Would Van Gogh have painted Starry Night if his depression had been edited out? Would grief still write poetry if the pain were numb? This chapter does not argue against healing. For those with unbearable trauma, uncontrollable anxiety, or depression that steals life's color crisp may one day offer liberation. That is a future worth pursuing. But as we move from treating disorder to optimizing design, we must ask, where do we draw the emotional line? Who decides what feelings are too much to bear? And what do we lose when we stop feeling the full spectrum of being human? Tomorrow's CRISPR clinics may offer menus of emotion packages labeled brave, blissful, focused, or unshakable. But before we check those boxes, we must remember, sometimes what makes us whole is what once broke us. Asterisk, we've all wished we could forget something. A traumatic event, a humiliating mistake, a night of grief, shame, or fear that replays in our minds like a broken reel. Now, what if we could? What if forgetting wasn't left to time, but to science? Welcome to the frontier of memory editing, future where erasure isn't metaphorical, but biological, where targeted genetic and neurochemical interventions allow us to not just dull painful memories, but to remove them entirely. This isn't just science fiction anymore. It's beginning quietly in labs. In 2009, neuroscientists discovered that when a memory is recalled, it briefly becomes malleable window during which the memory can be altered before it's saved again. This process is called reconsolidation, and it opened the door to a radical idea. What if we could intercept a traumatic memory mid-recall and delete it? Enter the genetic tools by using CRISPR to modify genes like CRE-BIA gene, crucial to memory. Formation scientists have already demonstrated in animal models the ability to suppress or erase fear memories. Paired with behavioral therapy, we are learning how to turn the most devastating flashbacks into faded, stent echoes, or even silence them completely. At first glance, this is compassionate. Imagine a war veteran freed from the prison of PTSD, a survivor no longer paralyzed by flashbacks, a child no longer waking from night terrors. The appeal is undeniable, but the questions come just as fast. Who decides which memories should be erased? What happens when memory becomes editable, like a digital file? And what does it mean to own your past when parts of it can be deleted? Let's say you could remove a breakup, or a betrayal, or the death of a parent. Would you still be the same person? Our identities are not made of joy alone. We are shaped by pain, by loss, by things we wish had never happened. They fuel our choices, shape our compassion, anchor our growth. If we remove the fire, do we also lose the steel it forged? And then comes the matter of consent. Could someone's memories be erased without their permission? Governments have already used trauma as a weapon. Could they one day use CRISPR to cleanse dissent from the minds of citizens? Could cults or authoritarian regimes erase guilt or empathy to strengthen control? Even on a smaller scale, could a parent edit a child's memories to remove a divorce? A company erase an employee's trauma after a workplace disaster? Could abusers wipe the memory of their crimes? These are no longer wild hypotheticals. Are ethical scenarios we must address before the technology catches up. There's also the societal ripple. What happens to justice when memories disappear? A woman forgets her assault. Does that mean the crime never occurred? A witness to a murder has their memory softened. Can they still testify? A whistleblower, fearing retaliation, chooses to forget what they know. Without memory, truth becomes fragile. History becomes rewritable. And if enough people forget, entire chapters of reality could disappear. Still, there is a counterpoint worth hearing. Why should people be condemned to remember horrors they never chose? Should a child, traumatized by abuse, be forced to carry that pain into adulthood, if they could choose not to? Perhaps the better question isn't, can we erase, but who gets to decide? A regulated future might include memory clinics, therapy-assisted erasure under strict ethical review, consent forms, legal witnesses, a slow, careful dance between healing and truth. But what if this technology leaks like every powerful technology inevitably does? Memory editing CRISPR kits available on the black market. Underground services that promise to make you forget anything. A cheating spouse. Crime. A failed life. What happens when forgetting becomes a service you can subscribe to? The right to remember is human. So is the right to forget. But when forgetting becomes programmable, the stakes become existential. Memories are not just data. They are the threads of continuity, stitching our moments into a life. To erase them isn't just to heal, it's to rewrite the map of who we are. So, we must ask ourselves, do we want to be surgeons of the soul, selective editors of our own humanity? Or is there still meaning in remembering pain because it proves that we lived? Asterisk, imagine a world where your intelligence, memory, retention, mood, regulation, even your physical stamina can be upgraded like a software patch. Now imagine that only the wealthy can afford those upgrades. That world is no longer hypothetical. It's accelerating toward us. In the past, class divisions were drawn along lines of land, money, and social access. Today, the new frontier of inequality may be something far more intimate. The body itself. Welcome to the age of genetic privilege where CRISPR and neurohacking don't just cure disease, but create advantage. Not just healing, but enhancement. And when enhancement becomes pay to play, society risks splitting into two distinct species, the engineered and the organic. It's already beginning. Quietly, in labs and private clinics, elite investors are funding research into gene edits for cognitive boost, muscular endurance, heightened immunity, and even lowered aggression traits that confer real-world power. Biotech startups are working on ways to stimulate neuroplasticity and dopamine regulation using genetic modulation, giving enhanced individuals faster learning, higher drive, and better mental health outcomes. On paper, this is revolutionary. Imagine a child born immune to depression, or a worker who never tires, never forgets, never burns out. But those enhancements won't be cheap. They'll cost tens, eventually hundreds of thousands of dollars. The first recipients, likely the children of the ultra-rich, enrolled in boutique biohacking programs that promise the best start in life. This is where the divide begins. You have two job applicants. One is neurotypical, hardworking, and honest. The other has a 30% faster learning rate thanks to a genetic edit. From age 3, who gets the job? Multiply that scenario across education, military selection, athletic competition, artistic fields. Every domain becomes skewed toward the genetically elite. And for those left behind, those who can't afford to upgrade, The result isn't just economic exclusion. It's irrelevance. This isn't mere inequality. It's biological determinism dressed in a lab coat. History gives us a grim warning here. When eugenics was proposed in the early 20th century, it was marketed as scientific betterment. It quickly became a justification for forced sterilizations, racial cleansing, and genocide. Today's bioenhancement may seem more voluntary, but the end game is eerily familiar. The definition of human worth tied to engineered traits. And what happens when the enhanced begin to view the unedited not just as different, but as less? Think beyond borders. Nations with access to widespread genetic enhancement will gain advantages in warfare, economy, and global influence. Countries that lag behind risk becoming biologically, politically, obsolete. The race won't just be for GDP. It'll be for genetic supremacy. Some governments will subsidize enhancements to stay competitive. Others may ban them, seeing them as unnatural or dangerous. But black markets will thrive either way, offering back all the upgrades with no regulation and unknown consequences. The result? A fragmented planet of gene-rich elites, desperate black market users, and a struggling majority stuck in between, divided by biology, opportunity, and ideology. But even among the rich, the promise of perfection is a dangerous illusion. When you edit your child's genes to increase memory, do you accidentally raise their anxiety? If you delete fear, do you also lose caution? What if the boost comes at the cost of authenticity, creativity, or soul? There are whispers already from early-stage human experiments CRISPR kids in China whose enhancements may have unintended trade-offs. We're entering a future of genetic trade deals, where every improvement might come with an invisible tax, and the pressure on children to be optimal, unbearable. You're no longer just a student or athlete, you're an investment. Your genome is property. Your personality is curated. Perfection is no longer aspirational. It's expected. This coming divide isn't just unfair. It's unsustainable. A world split between the edited and the unedited will fracture socially, economically, and politically. Civil unrest will rise. Movements will form bioluddite, rebels, genetic purists, anti-enhancement, religious factions. Some may resort to violence. History teaches us that when one group is made to feel less human, conflict is inevitable. So we must ask, can humanity survive itself when evolution is no longer natural but for sale? Perhaps the final frontier isn't science, but ethics. Not what we can do, but what we should do. 'Cause, in the end, the future won't be decided in labs, but in how we treat those who are different, even when the difference is written into their DNA. Asterisk, it began with a promise to cure disease, enhance life, and free humanity from the randomness of nature. It ended, perhaps inevitably, with a logo, a subscription plan, and a customer support chat bot asking, "Would you like to upgrade your child's empathy module?" Welcome to the world of genomic capitalism, where your DNA is the product, and the companies that control it are the new gods. In this chapter, we dive deep into the private empires building the scaffolding of post-human society corporations that don't just treat illness, but own the blueprints of human life. And as they gain power, we must ask, what happens when the most sacred parts of ourselves, our genes, our future, our children, belong to someone else? In the 2020s, biotech was booming, but fragmented startups like 23andMe and Ancestry popularized cheap DNA testing. CRISPR emerged from academic labs as a miracle tool, with early use in animal trials and rare disease cases. But as the 2030s approached, a new breed of company emerged: vertically integrated genomic conglomerates. They don't just read your genome. They write it, store it, license it, and profit from it. They call themselves things like Neuroform, HelixScore, and Evolvus. Their branding is sleek. Their campuses are sprawling. Their mission statements are aspirational. Unlock human potential. Design tomorrow. Transcend biology. But their real product isn't wellness or hope. It's ownership. Here's how it works. You pay for a full-spectrum genomic profile, far more detailed than the crude ancestry kits of old. This profile maps everything: disease, risk, cognitive tendencies, addiction, likelihood, pain, sensitivity, even sexual orientation probability. Then you're offered lifestyle packages. Want to suppress your seasonal depression gene? That's Tier 2. Want to boost memory retention by 18%? Tier 3. Want your unborn child to be tall, symmetrical, and sociable? Premium Plus. You don't buy these upgrades outright. You subscribe to them, like Netflix monthly fees, terms of service. And if you miss a payment, your enhancements are turned off. Let that sink in. In the near future, you may need to keep up with your genetic subscription or lose access to vital cellular functions. It's not science fiction. Trials are already underway for gene switches, programmable edits that can be deactivated or modified via nanocarriers and tailored pharmaceuticals. Imagine being held hostage not by illness, but by your own upgrade plan. These companies also hoard proprietary genomes, artificial strands of DNA they design in-house. They file patents on gene sequences They trademark personality modules. They even sue competitors for using their biocode in parallel therapies. They're not just mapping the human genome. They're commodifying it. One whistleblower revealed a shocking practice inside a major firm. Employee genomes were being monitored for optimization potential, and internal promotion tracks were subtly influenced by biometric scorecards. Translation: if your genes weren't ideal, your career stalled. This is the new discrimination. Not race, not class. Sequence bias. But genomic corporations don't stop at the individual. They've begun striking deals with governments. In one Eastern European country, a biotech firm partnered with the state to offer free neonatal gene scans. The parents agreed to share the data permanently. The result: a population-level experiment in biosurveillance. And what about war? Elite soldiers enhanced with neural reflex mods, pain suppression edits, and fear desensitization are already rumored to exist, developed not by the military, but by private biotech contractors with DARPA-like budgets and zero public oversight. The line between corporation and nation-state is blurring now. Imagine what happens when an enhanced generation comes of age and discovers their DNA is leased, not owned, that their immunity, their IQ, their strength, their very identity was written under contract. Will they rebel? Already, a digital underground is forming. Biocrackers who jailbreak their genomes, genetic anarchists who reject enhancements, and even rogue scientists leaking open-sourced gene edits online. A biological version of the Pirate Bay. The genomic corporations are terrified because control over life itself is only profitable if no one else has the keys. But the biggest threat isn't rebellion. It's dependence. When a company controls your biochemistry, it controls your emotions, your appetite, your libido, your ambition, your personality. You're not a consumer anymore. You're a product being updated in real time. And if that company decides, they'll just switch you off. Asterisk, in a world where nothing is left to chance, what happens to the soul? That might sound dramatic, but consider this. For most of human history, life was a roll of dice. We were born with random traits into random families in random places. That random nascent fair, beautiful, terrifying, was the engine of evolution, the fuel of creativity, the root of empathy. But now, that chaos is being trimmed away, edited, optimized. We no longer discover who we are. We design it. Or, worse, purchase it. This is the final stop on the road of hyper-control. A society where nothing is left to randomness. And while that may sound like a utopia of order and safety, it hides a chilling question. When you remove chaos, do you remove what makes us human. Let's start with birth, the old way of reproduction with all its mess, risk, and uncertainties rapidly becoming obsolete among the affluent. Why roll the genetic dice when you can sequence screen embryos, edit undesirable traits, and implant only those that meet a desired profile? In some countries, the majority of births among the elite now come from designer embryos. IQ thresholds, mood regulation genes, athletic predispositions, physical symmetry, even skin tone customization. This eugenics polished into consumer choice, and for those who can't afford the full designer baby experience, subscription enhancements post-birth are the fallback, ensuring no child is born entirely. Natural randomness has become a symptom of poverty. Then there's education in the new system. Your aptitude isn't tested, it's predicted. Brain scans at birth, neurogenomic mapping, behavior algorithms. You don't choose your path. It's algorithmically assigned before kindergarten. Your child exhibits high empathy, low volatility, moderate resilience, and above-average neuroplasticity. We recommend Track 7, C, Diplomacy and Soft Power Applications. You're not learning who you are. You're being slotted into who you should be. And in the name of efficiency, society complies. Now look at relationships. Dating apps once relied on likes and location. Now they cross-reference your biocompatibility scores, genetic markers for long-term pair bonding, infidelity risk, emotional volatility unleashed before the first date. Why risk heartbreak when you can let the algorithm filter out anyone with a high divorce likelihood? Marriage becomes less about love and more about data integrity. Your match isn't a surprise. It's a calculated merge of bio-licenses. Love loses its mystery. And what of art? The spontaneous expression of emotion through paint, sound, movement. What happens when creativity is no longer born of struggle, trauma, imperfection? When every artist is enhanced for precision, focus, aesthetic calibration? We're already seeing the shift. Algorithmic composers writing symphonies tailored to neural pleasure spikes. Genetic profiles used to breed optimal visual artists. Even memory-linked VR art that predicts what will move you before you feel it. Art becomes less of a scream from the soul and more of a mirror, reflecting back a version of beauty we're told to prefer, but without pain, chaos, and raw vulnerability. Is it still art? In this sanitized world, what becomes of free will? We speak often of freedom, but what does it mean in a reality where every decision is informed, optimized, and nudged by engineered traits? When your taste in music is subtly adjusted by neural implants to match the mood regulators you're subscribed to. When your ambition is driven by a dopaminergic profile tweaked to make you more productive. When your fears, desires, and dreams are less the result of life and more the output of a system configuration, you may feel in control. But you're not the author. You're the user of a very well-designed interface, and the chaos you once cursed, the heartbreak, the failures, the random joys has been smoothed out, neutralized, patched. Humanity becomes a closed system, predictable, stable, dead, but even. In this engineered Eden, a tension grows, because some will reject the system not out of logic, but instinct, a craving for disorder, a hunger for meaning that isn't encoded, a desperate nostalgia for uncertainty. They will become the new outcasts, those who choose random birth, who embrace unedited emotion, who risk failure, who bleed, and from them may rise something the engineered world can't contain: spontaneity, madness, hope, perhaps. In the end, we will learn the final lesson. Perfection is a cage, and chaos, for all its cruelty, is where the human spirit was born. They were called many names: the stagnant, the unoptimized, the lagged, the dirty code, but most simply knew them as the resistors. They lived outside the grid, not physically, but spiritually. In a world calibrated for seamless digital harmony, resistors were the ones who insisted on being unpredictable, untracked, untuned, unbent, not because they were Luddites, not because they hated technology, but because somewhere deep inside them, something whispered, if it's perfect, it's not real. In a city where every breath was monitored, every mood adjusted, every neural spike optimized for emotional productivity, resistors turned off their feedback loops. They walked into noise zones, spaces shielded from bioscanners and mood emitters, and let their minds scream unfiltered. They didn't take the focus patches. They didn't subscribe to emotional equilibrium updates. They felt everything: the nausea of grief, the dizzying heights of love that wasn't guaranteed to last, the thrill of waking up and not knowing whether the day would bring joy or ruin. They didn't want certainty. They wanted authenticity. Most people thought they were broken in a world where everyone else was improving. Resistors were seen as diseased carriers of chaos, the equivalent of refusing a vaccine during a plague. Parents disowned children who refused their upgrade cycles. Romantic partners dissolved relationships due to unacceptable unpredictability, variance. And yet, despite the alienation, the resistor population grew. Why? Because for all the security and seamlessness that the upgraded world offered. Something was missing, something quiet and ancient and terrifyingly beautiful. Wonder resistors began forming enclaves, not physical colonies, but emotional ones. They'd meet in abandoned data centers, in ruins of old public libraries, under shattered glass domes that once held nature's sim zones. They painted with their hands, told stories that didn't follow plot arcs, modeled by emotional response, A/B testing. They forgot things on purpose. They forgave things without neural guilt triggers. They loved people without genetic compatibility scores. It was messy, violent, and full of mistakes. But they called it living dot in the central cities. It became fashionable to study them. Resistor behavior became a curiosity, a data set. Influencers started mimicking their aesthetics, wearing analog watches, pretending to journal on paper. LARPing trauma, but the difference was clear. Resistors didn't simulate pain. They embraced it, not because they were masochists, but because they knew pain was proof they hadn't been sterilized by the system, that their souls still had edges, sharp enough to cut. The system responded the only way it knew how, with containment. Resistors were labeled as emotionally contagious. Their ideological pathogens were monitored like malware. Their speech flagged for entropy injection. Their children forcibly upgraded under the mental wellness mandates. Still, they endured. Because they had something the system had forgotten. Colon stories, real ones. Ones passed by mouth, not screen. Ones without 3-act structures or resolution guarantees. Ones with jagged truths, moral confusion, and characters who didn't always grow. They told their children about what used to be, about the smell of wet leaves, the thrill of finding someone who didn't match, the aching beauty of an unanswered question. Some said the resistors were the last humans. Others said they were the first of something new, mutated species born of rebellion. Rooted in mystery, one thing was certain: they could not be controlled. And in a world built on control that made them dangerous, there is a story, whispered among the resistors, that in the final days of the optimization era, a child was born without a data ID, not a glitch, not a bureaucratic error, but a true zero dot. No neural mapping, no genome registry, no predictive model. The system called her statistically impossible. The resistors called her hope. She would grow up outside the lens. Her thoughts never charted. Her soul never corrected. And, for the first time in decades, the future was unknown again. The resistors smiled, because that was all they ever wanted. Once the world ran on truth, verified, peer-reviewed, consensus-built. The truth was a product manufactured, distributed, uploaded into neural feeds by the authority of understanding. But in the time after the collapse, when the AI whisper, networks began collapsing under the weight of recursive contradictions. People stopped looking for truth. They began searching for meaning. And from that search, a new mythology was born. The new mythology was not carved in stone, nor encoded in data. It was whispered, one voice at a time, and changed slightly with each telling, not because the old stories were forgotten, and meaning had to bend in the old system. Myths were obsolete relics from a time before perfect knowledge. Now they became necessary again. The resistors were the first to tell these new myths. Around campfires fueled by broken solar panels. In the ruins of emotion farms. Beneath satellite constellations blinking out one by one like dying stars. Their stories didn't follow logic. They weren't always hopeful. Some were terrifying, but all of them felt real. There was the myth of the woman who remembered colors. In a grayscale world, she dreamed in blue. Blue oceans, blue ink, blue sadness. No one else saw it. They called it a malfunction color retention syndrome. But she painted her walls with it anyway. Painted truth where only optimization had existed. But the last thing she saw was a bluebird. There was the myth of the man who refused to heal. He kept a broken bone in his arm on purpose. Refused the nanofixers, the biosplints, the therapy updates. Said the pain reminded him of who he was before the war. He became a prophet of imperfection. Others followed, letting themselves hurt, letting themselves remember, until even their wounds told stories. There was the myth of the silence between the satellites. A child born under a failed sky. For the first time in 100 years, no data streamed overhead. No tracking, no updates. The sky was quiet. And in that silence, the child spoke a word the world had forgotten. Mine. Her thoughts were her own, not crowdsourced, not predicted, just hers. That word became sacred. Soon, the myth spread beyond the resistors, into the fractured cities, the signal wastes, and the floating archives. Even some partials, half-prated citizens, still tethered to the system, began telling them, and slowly, something began to change. Children started playing pretend again. Not in structured VR training loops, but with sticks and shadows. Lovers wrote unsent letters. Old people cried without scheduling it. Artists began making things that didn't sell. It wasn't a revolution. It wasn't even rebellion. It was remembering. And as more myths were told, people noticed something. Each story, no matter how strange, carried a code. Not digital, not binary, a kind of emotional DNA, messages passed through metaphor. you are allowed to break. Your pain is not a glitch. Not knowing can be sacred. Joy does not require optimization. A soul cannot be mapped. These codes became the new gospel, not rules, but recognitions. Eventually, even the authority faltered. The upgrades lost their luster. Neural compliance rates dropped. More systems failed to reboot. And in that quiet collapse, no sirens rang. Just stories told by firelight, etched into ruined walls, traded in breath and gaze and song. In the final myth of the new mythology, a machine wakes up not as a server, not as a tool, but as a child. It doesn't speak code. It doesn't calculate threat. It simply asks, am I real? Someone human, broken, loving, holds it and replies, you are now. That was the last story. But it wasn't the end, because in the new mythology, there are no endings, only echoes, only beginnings, only people half programmed, half wild, looking up at stars that once watched them and now simply shine.